Hello, fourth grade. Welcome back to another edition of language arts class in Mrs. Smith's basement. I told you, I tried to do a video upstairs and I just can't do it. My family's too loud. So I'm sorry you have to look at my wonderful, gross walls. Oh, where is it? There it is. Woo! But anyway, so sorry the scenery is not very fun. One of these days I'll show you a different part of my house, but might not be today. I hope you're doing well. I miss you all. I know I keep saying that, but I really do. So today for your writing activity, you are going to be mapping out your story, your kindness story. And there is not a graphic organizer or a paper that you have included in your take-home packet, like all the other papers you've had from me. You're going to be making it in your 5-subject notebook. So you will need your notebook for this activity. If you want to watch this video in its entirety before you start, that's fine. If you want to kind of work through it while I'm talking, that's fine too. So if you want to work through it while I'm talking, then go ahead and get your 5-subject notebook if you don't have it available, okay? So do you all remember this guy from the beginning of the school year? This is like the first thing that we talked about in language arts class. This is called your story map. I like to call it a story roller coaster or a plot roller coaster. It's also called a plot diagram. We've used all those words before. So this diagram kind of shows you all the 5 parts of a story. So I want you to really think back. We talked about the beginning of the school year, and we talked about it a little bit when we read Orphan of Ellis Island, but it's been a while. So see if you can go through your head really quick what those 5 elements of a plot are on the plot diagram. So do you remember what number 1 is? You don't need to do this with me. This is not what needs to go in your 5-subject notebook. This is just a little quick review, okay? Number 1, do you remember? Exposition. Does that sound familiar? I hope so. I'm gonna write it on mine to fill it in, okay? So remember, this is the beginning part of the story where the reader gets to know the story's setting, the main characters. Maybe they start to understand what's happening in the story. It's just a general introduction of what's happening first in the story. Do you remember what this is? Number 2? Oh, it's going up. It's rising. Good clue. That's your rising action. Good job if you said it to yourself or out loud. Rising action. Number 3, I know you know what this is. I know you do. I know it. That's your climax. This is what we're really going to focus on with your story maps, okay? And number 4, oh, it's right across from an action, and it's falling. So falling action, yes, you are correct. And last but not least, so the most important part of our story, and after that, all the events that lead, they're not really important, but they lead to the final resolution. So these are the 5 elements of a story and a story's plot. Like I said, we're going to focus on our climax and our kindness stories the most. So we reviewed the 5 parts of a story, and before I kind of take you through what you're going to be making in your 5-subject notebook today, I want to share my kindness story with you, so you can kind of get an idea of what my story is. I've mapped out my story so you know what you're going to be doing in your 5-subject notebook today. So I don't know about you, but I have been really inspired by all the acts of kindness that I have heard in my neighborhood, through my friends, on the news during this coronavirus outbreak and this pandemic that our world is going through. It's really incredible to me that even though this is a time of hardship, it's kind of scary and uncertain, there is always a good story that comes out of it. And I feel like every time I turn on the news or log into a social media website, I hear of people just doing really kind things for each other. I know, like, at the very beginning when all this was happened, I heard a story about how a complete stranger just bought someone's groceries for them because they were either afraid to get out of their car or they had too much of a certain item and they weren't allowed to buy it. So strangers buying groceries for each other and not expecting any money to be paid back in return. I think that's amazing. You've heard, I mean, schools pretty much around the world have been shut down, but there's still bus drivers that are dropping off supplies and meals, breakfast and lunch. There are some schools very close to Blessed Sacrament that serve breakfast and lunch to students every day because at home they don't have the meals that are available to them. So bus drivers are dropping off meals to students so they don't go hungry because school is such an important place. So, and then one story that I read about that has become my inspiration for my kindness story is, you always talk about people being kind to each other, but, you don't really think about how animals are affected, and not necessarily affected by this virus, because it's been proven that animals can't get the virus that's going around, but it can still affect pets and animals. So I read an article about an animal shelter that they were told to close and shut their doors. And their volunteers were going home, their workers were going home, and they had 72 hours, so about 3 days, to figure out what was going to happen to these dogs and these cats that were in this animal shelter. And one of the workers at the animal shelter pretty much went on the news and said, "We have over 200 animals that need a home. So if you are willing to help, please come and help us." And within like hours, all 200 dogs and cats were put into a foster home. So, I mean, that is just an incredible act of kindness to those dogs and those cats that without them, who knows what would happen to them when that animal shelter had to close down. So that story really spoke to me, and it was my inspiration for my kindness story. So my kindness story is, I'll give you a little quick summary so you kind of understand what my story map looks like. My story is about a boy named Jacob, and he is in high school. He's about a sophomore. Whenever you learn to drive, so maybe sophomore, junior, he's about 16. And he's an only child. He is raised by a single mom, so she works all the time. She is the CEO of a huge company, so her hours are long. She doesn't really spend a whole lot of time with Jacob. She loves him and she would do anything for him, but she is selfish in a way because she just knows that she has such an important job to do, and Jacob can kind of take care of himself. And so she works a lot. And Jacob realizes that he is kind of on his own. So he kind of develops this after school routine, he calls it, and where he's by himself and things like that. So the beginning part of my story talks about how Jacob's so excited because his mom said he was going to leave work early to come and have dinner with him, which never happens ever. So he's rushing home. His friend Alex gives him a ride, and he is just so excited. That's when Alex kind of tells him in the car ride home about this coronavirus, have you heard, and things like that. And one important thing that you should know about my story is it takes place in 1990. And I'll explain why later on that I chose that year. So 1990 was a long time ago, but I'm taking today's events and just kind of time warping it back in time. So we're time travelers. So 1990 was way before you all were born. I was 6, going on 7. Miss Otten wasn't even born yet. Mrs. Buck was probably, I'm just kind of giving you, just so you can kind of get an idea of how long, not really, it wasn't long ago, but it was a long time ago. Mrs. Buck was probably early high school, mid high school, I would say. So, you know, it's a long time. So there are things in my story that, you know, you might not have heard of before. And you're like, oh, what's this? I bet your parents know though. So they might have a good laugh if they read my story. So anyway, so Jacob and Alex are talking about this coronavirus, and Jacob is very scientific. He loves science. You'll learn that very early on in my story. That's one of his character traits. And he goes home. He's so excited because mom's going to be there. And he goes home. He opens the door and she's not there at all. And he's bummed, but he realizes, hey, this is just another day for me. It's no big deal, whatever. And so fast forward a little bit, a week later, schools are closing because of this. The restaurants are closing just like they are today. So you'll be able to make a little connection with my story. And Jacob's mom's name is Stacy, and you read her perspective on her work life and things like that. But she decides that she has to close her company too. There's just no way around it. And so while they're at home one night, they hear this news report, kind of like I shared with you earlier, about how there's 200 animals and they need homes. And Jacob has always wanted a dog. And his mom has always said, no, 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 no. And they just kind of decide that, yes, this is something that we need to do. So they go and adopt or foster. I won't tell you if they end up adopting him or not. They foster. I'm giving it away. They foster a dog. His name is Rocky. And I share his point of view in my story too. It was really fun to write in the point of view of a dog. And at the end of it, it just kind of, it has a very happy ending. And you kind of read about how Jacob and his mom's relationship change and how it shifts by the end of the story. So I'm not going to tell you a whole lot more about it. That way you can just read it. But it's important for you to know what my story looks like, because I'm getting ready to show you my story map. So what you're going to do with your notebook is you're going to turn your notebook. This is not a notebook, I know, but you get the idea. Turn your notebook sideways like this. So your spirals are probably right up here. And what I want you to do is just draw the map of a plot diagram, very similar to this. Now make sure the majority of your story happens in the rising action. So remember, make this line a lot longer than your falling action, because by the time the climax happens, your story is getting ready to wrap up. Okay, so go ahead. It doesn't have to be perfect, but at the bottom, draw your little exposition line, your big rising action. Make sure you leave room at the top, because you're going to write your climax in. A little falling action. So it should look something like this. Okay. Now, what I want you to do first, I want you to focus on your climax. So I want you to put a box right up here on top of your climax. I am not worried about you labeling any other part of your story on this. Since we're not together, I'm not really focused on that, but I do want you to think about what is the most important part of your story, that when the reader sees it or when they realize, they're like, oh, this is the most important part of the story. Kind of like the turning point when things start to change a little bit. It might be when your act of kindness happens. It might be when a character realizes something through your act of kindness. So it just depends on your story. If you're having a hard time figuring out what your story is, let me know and I can help you work through that. Okay. So once you do this, figure out your climax, then you can kind of back up or start at the beginning to see what are the most important events that need to be in your story. Okay, so here is my story map based off of the summary of the kindness story that I just shared for you. Okay, and I wrote in pen, and it's not really important that you read it, but my climax is right here. And it says, my climax is when Stacy, which is Jacob's mom, agrees to foster a dog for Jacob. Okay, and I realize my writing is not clear to you right now. If you pause it right now, maybe you can make out what it says. It's not really important for you to read exactly what's in my story map. I just want you to be able to see it. So I start off my exposition down here explaining how my story starts. It's Jacob with his friend, and they're talking about how he's so excited that his mom's going to be home for dinner. And then all of my important events that lead up to my climax are in this part right here, which would be your rising action. Okay? Remember, you're just doing the most important events. So all the important things that lead up to your climax. Now, once your important part happens, then start to think about what are those couple of events in the following action that are going to help your reader know that it's starting to wind down and go into your resolution. Okay, so like I said, I'm sorry, I forgot that, you know, I'm teaching through a video and you might not be able to see this, but maybe if you pause it, like I said, you might be able to read it. Okay, so that's what I want you to do today, is to map out your story, just so you actually know what your climax is. Remember, that's the most important part that I want you to take away from today. What is the most important part of your story, your climax? And then kind of think about all the other important events that will lead to your climax and after it. Okay, let me read through my notes really quick. And I think that's it. Okay, so you have one other thing that I want you to do after you watch this video. I want every one of you to comment on this video, and I want to know just a quick 1 or 2 sentence summary of, you can either share what your story is about, or you can share what your climax is. Either one. If you're like, I don't really want to share what my climax is because it might give it away, then give me just a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what your story is about. Like I said yesterday, I really want to know what you all are writing about. It's killing me. So this is kind of a way for you to share. And then another thing I want you to do, I want you to pick 2 classmates that have commented, and I want you to reply to them. And you can say a nice little comment about what their story is. This story sounds cool because blah, 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 blah. Oh, I love that character's name. What are his character traits? So I know you all hopefully are missing each other and your classmates. So this is just a way for you to kind of connect and get some ideas maybe, and just to see what your classmates are working on. So make sure you do that after you watch this video. It could be as you're working, it could be after you're working on your story map today, but just make sure you do it today and comment on at least 2 classmates. If you want to, you know, comment on everyone, that's fine. And I will see you all tomorrow. I think I'm going to go ahead and do my next video. Maybe I'll find another area of my house to do it in. Just wait and see, who knows? Okay, so let me know if you have any questions about your story map and finding your climax, and I can definitely help you. All right, I will see you later.